Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, vielen Dank, dass Sie heute gekommen sind zu einem sehr besonderen Abend. Ein sehr besonderer Abend, nicht nur, weil Richard Sennett sprechen wird und danach auch uns für eine kurze Diskussion zur Verfügung steht. Jemand, den ich, glaube ich, an dieser Stelle nicht weiter vorzustellen brauche. Seine Fangemeinde bei uns ist bereits schon sehr, sehr groß und stetig wachsend. Und es ist übrigens auch ein Abend, der erste Abend ist im Rahmen einer Serie solcher Abende, die in den nächsten Monaten stattfinden wird. Der nächste Abend bereits wird im Juni stattfinden. Da werden wir Richard Florida haben. Also eigentlich, wenn man sich das so vorstellt, ein ziemlich ordentlicher Bruch gegenüber Richard Sennett. Aber unsere Idee war ja auch tatsächlich durchaus auch eine Bandbreite, eine Vielfalt des Denkens und der Ansätze zu ermöglichen und auch natürlich logischerweise unsere eigene Reflexion auf diese Art und Weise voranzutreiben. Und dann folgen weitere solche Abende im Herbst, aber dazu möchte ich an dieser Stelle nicht noch mehr verraten. Ich freue mich jedenfalls, wenn Sie dann auch bei diesen weiteren Abenden zu Gast sein werden. Ich plane das auf alle Fälle. Ich lasse es mir nicht entgehen. Und ja, jetzt ist genug der Worte meinerseits. Richard, the floor is yours.
I'm sorry that I have to speak to you in English. Mein Deutsch ist sehr schlecht. Ich verstehe, aber es ist schwer. It's difficult for me to speak. And I have to tell you that I have just discovered that Maria has just graduated from my institute at the London School of Economics. So we have been having a discussion about far away in London, and which we will continue. I am going to speak to you tonight about my new book, and this is a book which is based on, I have worked nearly all my life as a consultant for the United Nations. And this book, my practical work has been for them as a planner. I very seldom I've worked a little in New York City, but mostly for the UN. And one of the thematics of my book is what we in the first world can learn from emerging cities in the third world. Not what we can teach them, but what we can learn from them. I should say as a preface to this, the idea of an open city may suggest to you a very familiar theme, which is how can we embrace foreigners? How can we deal with refugees and migrants? And these are serious problems, but the idea of an open city is much different in its form than that. And I'd like to just say as a preface to this that the obsession with how to manage migration, refugee migration, is something which I am not very sympathetic with in one way. I think it is a project of the far right, the question, and we have allowed ourselves on the social democratic left to be too to be too invaded by this question. I give you an example of what I mean. For my part of the London School of Economics has been looking at what effect automation will have on labor conditions in big cities like London, Paris, and Vienna. And, you know, we're estimating that in 20 years, that about 18 to 22% of the jobs that currently exist will disappear. It's a rather backward and trivial problem to worry about whether somebody is speaking Arabic on the street compared to what could be an absolute catastrophe for cities unless we have policies which address how to deal with a labor crisis, which could be much, much more, will be much more profound. But I just feel that we've let the far right lead us to think about questions of openness in cities entirely in terms of being invaded by refugees and immigrants. So I've tried in my book to get beyond that. And that's my idea of an open city is not about how to take in strangers. I can actually show you, I'm terrible at this. If I put somebody's eyes out, if I blind you, forgive me. I'm going to explain to you, this is a model for open cities as I've written about it in my book. I'll explain to you what this place is. This is a project that we're working to protect now. We even may make it a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And what it is I'll tell you physically what it is. This is the roof of a 3-story underground parking garage. But unlike the roof here in this project, this is inhabited by people. And was, yes, you'll tell me more about this strange space. Originally, this was just a plain garage, and this was the offices for the the Delhi government, who left. And the space filled up with electronic, largely electronic people who sell illegally or non-taxed electronic goods. And on the sides, this has become, as the old offices were abandoned, they have been carved up, and these have become startups, tech startups. So this is what the Silicon Valley of Delhi looks like. And the reason I'm interested in it is that it's a space that has 4 of the characteristics of open cities that you find in the developing world. The first is that it's a synchronous space. There are many different kinds of activities happening here at the same time. There are people selling these illegal electronic goods. There are also people selling saris. The offices here, which are filled with these startups, are not just startups of software companies, but also small manufacturing companies that make use of high-tech instruments. There's a movie theater at the end, which shows films dubbed into 3 languages. So there are lots of things happening here all at the same time. And that's a characteristic of synchronous space, of open space, that it's marked by synchronicity. The second aspect of it is that this is an informal space. This roof was never meant to be used by anyone. It was meant to be just like the roof down here, a windswept absence of people. There is no planning for this. So that this informal market, which is very vigorous, people from all over Delhi, which is an urban conurbation of nearly 35 million people, come here to shop for stolen iPhones or illegal iPhones, like this one, which I bought from, there used to be a shop here. But it's a space which is constantly transforming itself because of it embodies informal economic activity, but the spatial uses are constantly shifting so that it is informal in that sense. The third aspect of an open city that you see here is that it's an incomplete form. And I'll explain to you later what that means. As a piece of infrastructure, it's unfinished. Whereas again, just looking out the window here, these are objects which would cost a fortune to alter in any way. These spaces can be radically reconfigured. And even the top of the roof has been reconfigured to support the weight of so many people on it. So its infrastructure is incomplete, that is to say, it can evolve in time. And finally, it's porous. That is that the edges are not sealed to this. There's down here, there's a huge bus station. The genius of this space is that it's 80 centimeters above the ground, so it drains when it rains. It's physically a porous space. You can come in and out of it without controls. And the porosity extends to it socially. For instance, when this market ends, when the sun goes down, the police make a huge sweep through here, men in wonderful uniforms, behind them is a massive pavement dwellers who are going to sleep here at night. So you have to imagine, and the police know exactly what's happening. I have a photo, which I don't have here, of this line of these beautifully dressed policemen, behind which are the poorest of all people in India, the masses of people who have to sleep out in the open. So it's porous socially that way. It's sociologically interesting because it also mixes Muslims and Hindus. It should be, according to the logic of, say, the far right here, sorry, I don't mean to dwell on this, this mixture should be a cocktail for explosion. In fact, this is the most, in a city where there are religious explosions all the time, this is the most peaceful part of Delhi. It's had the least violence, religious violence between Muslims and Hindus. And I think the reason for that is because physically it is a space which is not containing, there's many reasons for that. People work, they work side by side, but physically people are not walled in. It's a space that allows people to come and to go so that the pressure of being with the other is constantly released. So these are 4 characteristics that I explore in my book of openness: synchronicity, informality, incomplete infrastructure, and porosity of spatial form. And if you follow me and build according to this, you will open up a city. As I say, we're trying to protect this because this is a space that was abandoned originally when the city government moved out. Then this has become very, very alive space. And now, of course, real estate developers want to seize this and rebuild it. And if we make this a World Heritage Site of informal public space, we'll be able to protect it, I hope, against them. I'll show you a contrast to what a closed space looks like. I worked on, I'm sorry to say, on this project. This is a failure of mine. This is planning we did for central Shanghai for its transport system in the 90s. And the closure here is the separation of functions. In purely architectural terms, these raised highways are beautiful. They're fantastic. They're on these pilates, which are wonderfully designed. It's from the air. You can see how they're raised up. It's thrilling. I took this in a helicopter, and it's thrilling that way. On the ground, it's all dead space. And the reason for that, in part, is that there is no synchronous relationship between movement in the city and habitation. All the space underneath here, you can see it in this, is unused. We're in central Shanghai, a city of incredible density, incredible pressure, and we created what is, in a sense, a kind of abscess for that. Now I'll show you something that is, let me show you another failure. This is, I worked on a project in Dharavi. This is in Dharavi, Mumbai, is very much like the space in Delhi. It's a slum, and people live on the first floor. There are basket weaving little factories here, but mostly the amazing system of tiffin boxes, which spread luncheon for people, office workers throughout the city, are cooked here. So there's synchronicity. It's a highly informal space. But it has the defect, it has a high level, it's very unsanitary. The plumbing is non-existent. It's had instances of cholera and so on. Our solution to it was to build this. World Bank, UNDP, decided that this would be its much healthier space. It has flush toilets, which are a luxury for poor people in India. It's got lots of space to play, open space, and so on. I took this picture the day that, the week after it opened. Here's what it looks like today, that same space. Why is it degraded like this? It's degraded because this is a space that can't be used economically. It's a space that you couldn't do any of this activity. People have to commute many hours to get from Dharavi to this, many minutes, sorry, to get from Dharavi here, using motorcycles and little motor carts, which are polluting. But most of all, it's a space in which people feel, by separating work and family, that is not really theirs. We say in English, they haven't taken ownership over it, and we mean that in a kind of emotional sense, rather than they don't have pride in this space. And it's in that sense, it's a closed environment because it's monofunctional, which degrades. I show you just one of the origins for this kind of building. Most of you know this. This is Le Corbusier's Plein Voisin, 1924. The idea that you grade flat the Marais district in Paris, which was at that time also very insalubrious, and you build these 18-story towers here. And I show you this because it has one of the contrasting characteristics of a closed system, which is additivity. Corbusier thought you could add more and more and more of these towers, and that you have parts which can be just added to almost ad infinitum. He wanted all Paris to look like this. And the structural property of that is that the whole is equal to the sum of the parts. That's a basic characteristic of a closed system. You don't have synchronicity, where you create something that's bigger, where the whole becomes bigger than the sum of parts, because it interacts. This is a painful lesson that we've had to learn in planning in the UN, because we need to build at a very large scale. You know, for the, you know, in a city like Delhi increases its population by 700,000 every year. So you can't do a Jane Jacobs sort of thing of nice slow growth and so on. You have to provide at a large scale. But how to avoid additivity is a very, very important issue for us. I'll show you one other failure. This is in Shanghai is a courtyard form called the Shikuman, which was home for decades to people who didn't have passports to live in Shanghai. You know, the Shanghai, the sans-papiers, I don't know how you say that in German, but people without papers were mostly people from the countryside, not ethnic foreigners. And they lived in these courtyard forms. And a housing estate was formed by artists who loved these courtyard forms and transformed into this. The problem is that none of these people are there anymore. This is an artist cooperative, very shaming to me in that sense. It's exactly the same space. And structurally, what's important about this is that most, I think typically most activities that involve gentrification move from this open to this kind of closure. And you can see it lacks it lacks the kind of emblems of life, you know, but there is no life there. It's a simulacrum of its former self. So that's a contrast that I work with in my book, between open and closed. And I'm terribly long-winded, I'm sorry. You just have to bear with me. I'll try and go faster. And what I'm interested in is how we, in places like London, Paris, or Vienna, can learn from both the successes and failures in emerging urban development. I would like to say two things about the background of this. In urbanism, we ought to be making a contrast between ville and cité. A ville is the work we make of making built form, and the cité is the way that built form is inhabited. In France, these originally, up to about the middle of the 17th century, the ville represented something very big, and the cité represented a quartier, just small. But then this distinction became between a physical form and the habitation of it. And I draw this to your attention because in modern urbanism, we somehow often we believe that what we build, that is the ville, should follow the cité, that is how people want to inhabit. What I have discovered from planning work I've been doing is that this idea, which is so appealing to us, make places where people want to live, is in fact hides a very deep structural problem. The most popular places for people to live in when they have any disposable income for housing are gated communities. That's what people want. It's true in Sao Paulo, where we worked. It's true in Accra, where we're often working. The notion of building a gated community is morally, ethically offensive to me. And the planner, I think, should resist people's desire to live in gated communities, should refuse to build them, which suggests a structural issue. It's true that in one way, most developers are building in ways that are not very easy to inhabit. I don't want to say anything about this project because I've only lived here, I've only been in it two hours, but you understand what I mean. But the other side of that, that's an effect of capitalism, that you build what people, you force people to live in a kind of capitalist dream. But the other side of it is that oftentimes what people want is not what is a good way to live. So in my book, I'm trying to understand this as a structural asymmetry, that there's no way really to square this circle, and you have to work with it. And for me, open systems planning doesn't solve this problem, but it at least opens up other dimensions of both the way to live and the way to build, which might in some way relieve it, but not erase it. I don't believe that there is some perfect, and as an urbanist, I've never believed this, that there is a model of the city. This, I think, is a tyrannical and hubristic notion that planners have, that I see with my students, a solution to the problem of the capitalist city. There can't be a solution. There can't be. There can be many different alternative solutions, but it makes the planner a kind of a dictator in a way that shouldn't be. But on the other hand, the reverse of that is that popular desire shouldn't also be dominant. There should be a tension. And I think the open city way of proceeding is a way to deal with that. I became interested in this problem I teach at MIT off and on. And MIT is the home of open systems planning. And I'm going to show you a problem that MIT faced, which may give you an idea what an open system as a system is about. I have to find it here. Here it is. We're now at the opposite end of the sorts of things that the UN is concerned about. This is the city of Masdar. It's a smart city in the UAE. And part of its planning is to create places for driverless cars to be able to park in the city, to move people around. And this is a model of, it's actually built, of what's called a docking station. MIT then began working on the weight and size of the batteries of the cars that were going to be in this docking station. They were able to shrink the weight of these lithium batteries, and therefore shrink the size of the car, which made a huge problem. If you got out of one of these new cars, you would have a 26 centimeter gap between you and the docking station. The thing that they were worried about, which was a source of closure, was too tight a fit between form and function. It's a structural problem in a lot of commercialized smart city planning. You get a solution for a problem, an element evolves like this, and suddenly this tight fit between form and function has meant that you get technological obsolescence. So, do you understand what I'm saying? Something that completely serves its purpose is a recipe for something that is going to die in time. There's no evolution. And out of that problem, this, by the way, is a car designed by Norman Foster's office. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And you know, when they delivered the first 20 of them to Masdar, people went, oh, well, it's a wonderful thing, but it's not for us because we've already built the docking stations. Now they're tearing the docking stations down. So this problem energized a lot of the work in MIT that's been going on the last 15 years about how to avoid this problem of tight fit and make smart cities that were looser fit between form and function. And I would say that the elements that they've come up with as, and I've been sort of, when I can teach there, I've been involved in this, of an open system, not necessarily an urban open system, but more largely, is that an open system is nonlinear. That is, things are allowed to deviate, to change. Something unexpected like this comes up and the system can absorb it. They feature complexity rather than clarity. That is, in an open system, you have, I've given you an example of that in the synchronous activity in Nehru Place, which is a complex system. It's not clear what's happening in any part of it. It doesn't have an urban image that clarifies exactly what's going on. In an open system, what you do is accumulate complexities rather than do image making of which clarifies a system. Corbusier is a closed system, and it's clear. You know exactly what it's about. And thirdly, that it's also part of that the whole becomes more than the sum of the parts. And thirdly, any open system admits a lot of noise. Now, porosity is a form of noise. There's things coming in from the side, or you're going out from the side. In an open system, noise also stands for things that fail, things that stop working, things that have to be attended to because they're problematic. And the capacity to admit noise into a system is the way the system itself learns. In most artificial intelligence, for instance, good designs for artificial intelligence, don't filter out noise, they take it in. And you know this in very simple ways. When you're intrigued by the wrong answer to a problem, you are, in systems term, working with its noise. You want to know why it's wrong. It's oftentimes the wrong answers are far more interesting and suggestive than solutions. So these are three aspects of open systems in general. They're nonlinear, they're complex rather than clear, and they deal with noise. And basically what I've tried to do in my book is apply these ideas of open systematicity to urban built form. I want to, because I'm talking much too long, I want to just show you a little of some of the stuff we're doing. We're very interested. This is a closed, this is we make a distinction in urban systems theory between borders and boundaries. A border is noisy. There's exchange with happening at the edge and so on. A boundary is, in urban terms, is something like this traffic system which divides a very poor area in Caracas from a middle-class area. There's only one bridge to get across. This was built by Cesar Chavez, in case any of you think that he's a heroic figure, not to me. And it eliminates noise in that sense. So we are trying, with the help of Enrique Peñalosa, who is the mayor of Bogota, we are trying to figure out ways to convert a boundary like this, traffic boundary like this, to make it more porous. And I can show you some of those techniques if you like. I want to show you one other thing. You probably saw this from Ricky ad nauseum. We are doing a lot of work on density as a form of open systems. And I'll just show you one of these. And this is a very nice image of it. We're doing experiments on, if you take the one density and one square an equal area, different ways of building housing from closed to open. This is a closed way. This is, oops. I have to be careful with this, you may die. This is a closed way. This is a Corbusier way that and it's what you see around here. You know, you have a tower surrounded by emptiness. This is a traditional way. It's the same density here, the same area, a street. It's, unfortunately, the public space in this traditional street is very difficult to use by people because it's clogged with cars and so on. So we're doing experiments with how to make modular forms of housing. All the shaded areas here can be replaced. I was inspired to work on this by the errors that we made in Dharavi about how to make courtyard spaces, essentially, which are public spaces, which can be refigured in time. And that's the work of sort of opening up. It's a perimeter form. You can see what it is, but it's a perimeter block in which all the parts can be taken out. And I want to show you one. I'm not going to talk about that. This is an early project that I did when I was planning commissioner in New York, a planning commissioner in New York. This is an example of incomplete form, or treating a Western piece of infrastructure as though it were like Nehru Place. This is the West Side Highway under 125th Street, to the south is Columbia University, and over here is Harlem. And before we started working on this project, the black, poor Harlem and rich, mostly white Columbia University never intersected. And so we treated this as an incomplete form, waiting for something more to be done. And we put in this very ugly grocery store, which makes all architects say to me, how could you? How could you do this? But it's a place for physical meeting between you know, whites going to get a carton of milk and blacks, that they're physically intermixed with each other. And what I would like to see as a way of opening up and making use of incomplete forms in the city is more infills like this. I don't think we could do this in Shanghai. If I go back to that, sorry, this is so out of. This is a kind of irreparable space, in a way, for that kind of structural infill, except at its edges. The tall parts of it, probably not, but just the edges here were coming off. And so we're working with the Shanghai government now to figure out ways in which we can do more infill of that sort, just at the ramps where cars come down. So that's basically the project of my book. And I'm just going to end by showing you a photograph. You will find in my book, here we are. You will find in my book a lot of criticism of Jane Jacobs. I think she is an urbanist whose idea of slowness and of small scale are not suited to building cities at the scale we need to build, certainly in the developing world. But I like to show people this photograph. This is me when I was younger and thinner. And this is Jane Jacobs. We had martinis every Friday afternoon, and she drank many more than I could. The important thing about this photograph is the man in the middle. This is somebody drunk who's slumped over. He's had it. And I, being sort of young and thinking this is a great Jane Jacobs, maybe we should move him or something like that. And she said to me, you don't understand what a city is. He has a right to be here as well. Let him sleep it off. He's not doing you any harm. And that's a kind of urbanity which I think in a way we need to recover in urbanism, but not by her means. I mean, it's a kind of humanity about differences in a city that I was very ashamed of myself when I said, maybe we should move him, Mrs. Jacobs, and she said, not at all. And it's something we're losing in modern cities, which takes me back to the very beginning of where we started, which is why I think we should stop worrying about hearing Arabic on the street. Oh, thank you very much.